a lot of us think of digital transformation as this like big, huge gamble, right? We're gonna just upend the business. We're gonna take this home run swing. And if we hit it, then awesome, we win the World Series. But if we miss or we get anything less than a home run, then we lose.
You're listening to Build Up, the Homebuilder podcast, brought to you by ZGM.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Santana.
I'm a home building marketer, brand strategist, and your host of the Build Up podcast.
And I'm a digital marketer and the executive producer of Build Up.
And together, we love applying our expertise to the home building industry. Join us as we uncover industry insights, chat with colleagues, and explore exciting ways to push the home building world forward.
So, Jordan, today on the podcast, we have one Jeff Archibald. He is the managing director at Paperleaf, an app development company. And the reason that I wanted to have him on today, other than him being a dear friend of ZGM in many ways, is that Jeff does the best job of anyone I've met for translating nerd into layman speak. So what I mean by that is, well, we're going to talk about digital transformation today. And he does a really great job of breaking down what that is, but then also from that business owner perspective, what does that mean from planning at your processes and translating those digital pieces that we need into things that plebs like me can understand. So welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on, you two. Appreciate it.
Yeah, welcome, Jeff. Thanks for joining us today for this little chat on digital transformation. I'm very excited to have you translate some nerd speak into some layman speak. Is that fair to say? Does that mean?
I think that's fair to say, and I think I can do it reasonably effectively because I'm like only like a pseudo nerd. I like got out of development as soon as I could because I realized I wasn't very good at it. So I think if I actually knew more, then maybe I would have a harder time doing it. But no, I appreciate it. You know, I sit kind of right in the middle of development teams and clients we build stuff for. So that's kind of my job, is I have to be able to do that. So yeah, hopefully I can do that today.
So you play the role a little bit of interpreter.
Yeah, sometimes interpreter and translator, and so does our whole like leadership team. The big thing for us is, kind of hunting to make sure that we are focused on the true objective of the outcomes we're trying to achieve with the things that we build. Rather than, getting lost in the weeds and then focusing on the features, because it's really easy to blow budgets and build things that don't actually move the needle at the end of the day if you lose sight of where you're trying to go. So that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, and I think that's almost the goal of our conversation today is how do we help our listeners and potential clients to not get lost on that journey. And I think even before that, and help them, really before that is to help them understand what that journey could even look like or what it should look like. And I think that's where I want to start. And I want to ask you the question, what is digital transformation? What does that actually mean?
It's definitely like a buzzword, right, that we've all heard and seen everywhere. So it can mean a variety of things. But like, if you think about it quite literally and just focus on the two words and make it up, it is transforming your organization to be digital focused, right? So, but a better definition that I 100% stole from somewhere, and now I can't remember it, is it's a mindset or approach that places a focus on using technology to dramatically improve services or workflows. So I think like that middle part of that sentence is really, really the big one. It's using technology to dramatically improve services. So it's just like, it isn't about like, making a minor change. And so now you're not scanning your signatures. Now you're signing stuff online. Like that's a pretty minor change, but that's more like digitization, right? It's not really digital transformation. Digital transformation is more of like looking at your whole service offering and whole business model and thinking way down the road to what it would look like if you really leaned into technology and, a digital first approach.
I think the big question that I have, and I think a lot of people have, is why is it important? Like, why is that something? Like, there are a million different places that I can put my attention. Some that might be, right in front of my face, which is my pricing and product availability and economics and marketing. Why is digital transformation something that I should be paying attention to, something that I should be thinking about?
The caveat there is it isn't necessarily something everybody needs to be focused on. Like my local bakery down the road, I don't care if they do things super old school. I just want to go there and get like a good croissant. I don't really need to have some incredible digital experience. But for those organizations that are competing on in like a highly competitive environment, or competing at scale, or wanting to grow, or carry a lot of risk, those are some of the reasons we might really want to think about digital transformation. Like I kind of always look at like three sort of big goals when it comes to digital transformation. Realistically, it's if you're looking to improve your internal and external user experience, or customer experience, if you want to think about it that way. If you're looking to improve efficiency and grow margins, so we can do a lot of automation and replace a lot of slow, manual, error-prone labor when we kind of lean into technology. And then the risk mitigation side of it, like there's when you're dealing with data, and let's say, excuse me, you're doing it old school, you're keeping everything in-house on paper. Those sorts of things are rife for large consequence if there's any sort of like fire or flooding or anything like that. So usually when we're talking about digital transformation, the organizations that are looking at it and the reasons why they should care about it boil down to one of those three reasons. They have one of those three goals.
Do you have any good examples of successful digital transformation? Like what could that actually look like?
I'll try to keep this relatively short, so butt in because I'll ramble like crazy. But there's one of our old clients. This is interesting because they're a nonprofit. They're called FireSmart, and they're a small team, right? And their whole operation is around educating communities who live at the kind of wildland urban interface, is what they call it. So like think about like the Bragg Creeks, the places that are close to wildfire zones. Educating them to make smarter decisions in how they design and build their houses and property to mitigate the risk of wildfire. And so they have this whole program where, if you go through all these steps, evaluate your house, make the changes, get a fire smart certified fireman out there to review everything, then you can get like a better rate on your insurance and all this kind of stuff. So the whole process before was like super manual. Download these PDFs, print them off, go run through this checklist, see how things are, shaping up. Do you have like cedar shingles versus like aluminum ones or whatever? And then take all of that and, like basically scan it and send it back into us. And then we'll book with the fireman and so on and so forth. It's just this big, long, tedious process. So they looked at it and said, like, there's got to be a way to use technology to make this a hell of a lot faster. Like, what would FireSmart look like if it leaned more into digital? And so, end of the day, to keep the story semi-short, we built them out this mobile app that hooked into their centralized web application. And so any end user could download the app, self-assess their house, send the results in for them automatically to their kind of central database. They could assess the results and then automatically book someone to go view the property. So like all of a sudden, you put the power back into the people's hands to self-assess their property, as opposed to like getting someone out there to assess it with paper and all that kind of stuff.
Jeff, I think one of the big barriers to entry, or maybe mental blocks that people, especially business owners, get when they think about digital transformation is it feels like, and sorry to get too on the nose with my metaphors here, but it feels like for a lot of people, either you're gutting the house and rebuilding it rather than what you and I know it to be, which is, renovations one at a time based on needs. So maybe can you tell us about what the smallest pieces of digital transformation could look like versus a full scale rebuild your company into like a scary Web3 cyborg organization?
Yeah, for sure. Right. Like, and if we leave out the nuance, I think sometimes a lot of us think of digital transformation as this like big, huge gamble, right? We're going to just upend the business. We're going to take this home run swing. And if we hit it, then awesome, we win the World Series. But if we miss or we get anything less than a home run, then we lose. right? And that's super dicey, like I don't make those kind of decisions with Paperleaf, right? And nobody at ZGM or anybody else listening to this podcast wants to make those decisions either. So I think like when I think about digital transformation, I think about it as like a series of small, generally lower consequence bets that are kind of like future informed, if that makes sense. So like we work with our clients to make sure that we set the general vision. We go through the process of like 5 years from now or 10 years from now, if technology is the focus, if we were to totally reinvent this business, like what could it look like? Let's just brainstorm and blue sky it kind of thing. Talk about the current pain points, inefficiencies, the current state. Then you kind of get to this point where there's current state, end state, but the gap in between is all about execution, and that's where all the risk lies, right? And so that gap in between, what you don't want to try to do is go from current state to digitally transformed state in one go, right? You want to have a whole bunch of points along the way, and you want to be able to course correct if things don't go perfectly, and they're not. And so, like if you're saying, we want to totally transform our business, so it's, let's say, to use a FireSmart example, putting the power back in people's hands to assess their own properties and everything else. We did that in small bits and pieces. The first thing we rolled out was a mobile app. It wasn't cheap, but it also wasn't $1 million. And if it failed, they would be out some grant money. And that was more or less it. And then when it proved successful, you can add on the next piece and the next piece and the next piece. And we can kind of, adjust along the way. So that's the big thing is, you're working towards an end goal, but it really is like step by step instead of just trying to make one big leap.
That's really interesting. And that definitely, I think, even for myself, is makes this concept seem far more acceptable. And the fact that, we're not trying to go from we do business this way one day to doing business that way another day. I almost think about it even in terms of our own business, which is ZGM, the agency. And I remember when I started my career in advertising, we had sheets of paper. So we would have changes to, a client would come in, we'd have a conversation, they'd have changes to a material or something. We would write all of that on a piece of paper, print it out, take that downstairs to the creative team, and they would file it and put it in the process and resource and all that sort of thing. Versus today, where that process is done using our project management software called Asana. Changes go into Asana, it digitally goes to our resource manager, digitally gets assigned over. And it's really kind of changed the way that that's happened. And I remember having conversations at the other agency saying, is this something we should do? And, that seems so difficult and so hard. But then when we did it, now it's like, how could we ever even think of doing it the old way? Like, that just doesn't even make any sense. And then also thinking of through the pandemic, like how could we have possibly have done it the old way through the pandemic? Like we needed this kind of thing. So I think it does seem very scary, and there are a lot of different people involved who are going to see something as very scary. Like, are there any things or any ways to sort of help mitigate that fear?
The first kind of crack at an answer, I guess, would be like understanding the difference between risk and consequence. You know what I mean? So like something can be high risk but low consequence, meaning like, yeah, there's a high likelihood you might actually fail, but what are the consequences? They're not really that big. That's an acceptable path to proceed down. But what you want to avoid are the high risk, high consequence outcomes, right? And so like where it's high likelihood that it's going to fail, and if you do fail, then everything kind of goes to hell. So want to avoid those sorts of things. But like when we're talking about digital transformation and the scariness of it and how to take the baby steps toward it, I think one of the things we've learned is that there needs to be someone in the driver's seat on the client side who believes in what technology and digital transformation can do and believes in innovation as like a core value, and has the aptitude to, have the right vendors and teammates and employees around them. Because if you don't have the internal champion, or if someone doesn't really believe in it, it's going to sputter and die. We like to say, if you're not disrupting someone, then you're primed to be disrupted. And a really good example of that is the whole the big banks. They've all rolled out robo-investors now. But the reason they've rolled out robo-investors is because like Wealthsimple and Wealthfront, I think down in the States, totally ate their lunch because they were the ones that were innovating. And so it's better to be ahead of the curve on that than it is to be behind it. And so Jordan, to take your example about like the entirely paper-based inefficient processes that, used to follow at that old agency before, we adopted Asana, like that would have been, it would have kind of been a death knell for any agency to be, or at least they would have been scrambling like crazy if they're still doing it that way. So you have to buy in and you have to understand the difference between risk and consequence. And you kind of have to, have a champion internally who can kind of move those things ahead using baby steps,
Jeff, you stole my point. We've had lots of conversations before about this. And, we originally talked about risk. You used the example of if all of your stuff's on paper, fire and flood, but also the risk of, people eating your lunch, because it's a thing. And because we're a home builder podcast, we're talking about home builders. What a hell of a crowded space. Like, this is definitely a space where everyone's doing a lot of similar things. And how are you avoiding having that happen?
For sure. And like, I think too, because we've even noticed it at Paperleaf, when we were like 4 or 5 people, we would just do anything because, like it didn't really matter. We were super small. We could be crazy nimble. The consequences weren't ever that big. Now that we're, 30 people, which isn't huge, but it comes with, higher monthly expenses and all that kind of stuff. It's more difficult to rationalize bigger changes. So one of the ways that we look to do that is we kind of look at experiments. We look at, we think ahead to the future. We say like, oh, we could operate like this as a business, but why don't we just carve out like, try this as an experiment on one project or with one team or with one client, and let's see how it goes, rather than kind of like going all in at the outset and learning the hard way if something doesn't work.
I like that concept of experiments, because if we're talking about the fear side of digital transformation, and there's a lot of it, I think, because, this is new territory in a lot of ways. This is not something proven that I can give you a case study for and say, if we do this, we'll get X. But that incremental experiment side of thing, which is, I think, what you were talking about at the beginning as well, that's how you do a digital transformation. You don't just go from, overnight, we're changing the entire course of our company or the way that we deliver products. So I think that's very important. And I think as well, you gave a great example or a great answer to belaying those fears and the benefits or maybe the risks of that. And that, someone out there could be eating your lunch because they're going to come and take that process that everyone else is doing and totally transform it and make it simpler, better, faster, cheaper. Or someone is out there and you're the one that is able to make that change, and you're the one that's able to eat everyone's lunch, which is pretty interesting. So you kind of have to be thinking about it from both sides. There are a lot of significant benefits to digital transformation. And, I was just reading this article recently on McDonald's. And you used to be able to order from McDonald's by going to the counter or by going through the drive-thru. Today, you can order McDonald's those 2 ways, or you can order it on a touch screen in the store. You can order it from a mobile app in the store for counter pickup or delivery to your table or drive-through pickup, or you can order McDonald's on Uber Eats or DoorDash, or just there are infinitely more ways to order McDonald's today than there were previously. And that has significantly increased not just their sales on a gross level, but on an individual level. The amount per person spent is greater when the purchase is made through the app than when the purchase is made in person. And I think that's really interesting and such a huge benefit of digital transformation, right?
Yeah, for sure. It totally is. And like, that's one of those things too, like when McDonald's rolled out the, the kind of ordering kiosks in the specific unit, like buildings themselves, they didn't say, okay, snap their fingers and we're rolling this out to every single place, right? They did an experiment. They just picked a few like kind of alpha locations and put those in and kind of saw how it went. And then when they saw the potential of it and that people would actually do that, then they had the gas in the tank, to roll it out. But the risk became a lot lower. The consequence was still high, but the risk became way lower, which is, I think, really interesting. And I would imagine too, like, none of us were really in the room for those conversations, but like we like to talk about what if questions when it comes to brainstorming and thinking about like what digital transformation could look like for the organization. And so like you can kind of put yourself in that room, and somebody in there is like, what if people could just order through the app and just show up and get it, or food showed up on their doorstep? Or what if they, we were able to like triple our flow through in the actual locations themselves because we had a few machines in there and people didn't have to wait in line. like all of that kind of stuff. That's usually like where the nucleus of these ideas kind of start, and then you could start getting into the nuts and bolts later of those what if questions. But that's it's a perfect example of everything we're talking about, I think.
Well, as two agencies here, like we're an advertising agency and you're in the, the digital space, we constantly get people that will come to us and say, well, what results can you guarantee us? What can you guarantee us? What about data? What about this? And, we can make a lot of good like decisions informed upon those things. But as long as you're only chasing data, you're really just keeping pace with your competitors. Like you do need to take some strategic small scale risks in order to be an innovator, because that data can't inform necessarily in a full extent like what will be the future, what will be innovation.
Right. It's impossible to predict the future. But what we can do is make informed hypotheses, and we can crunch some numbers. And because at the end of the day, as much as we all like to talk about the creative side of all the work that we do, the crux of a lot of business is just math. You know what I mean? That's what it comes down to. So like I personally am never going to charge down any path of digital transformation without like building out a business case for it. Saying like my hypothesis is that, if we build this software, internally, that we're going to have 15 minutes of time savings per request. And that's 225 grand of total salary. So that means that's $130,000 of time savings per year. As long as we build this thing out, that it's, the 2-year implementation cost is under 175 grand, then we're having gains from year 2 onwards. And that's just kind of like the math and data side of it. And I think that's a part of it that needs to be balanced with like the fun brainstorming what if questions that come along with digital transformation. But that's also like, if you're the person listening to this going like, I am the internal champion in my company for digital transformation, how can I get buy-in? You need to paint the enticing vision of what the company's future 5 years might look like down the road later. But you also need to have a business case and some math behind it, to get buy-in. You can't have one or the other, you need both.
So I guess the question becomes, Jeff, and maybe this becomes the fun and exciting part, but so let's say that I am that internal champion at X company who's listening to this, and I'm like, all right, I feel like there's an opportunity here. But where do you sort of start? Like, how do you decide, it's going to be that paper process, or we're going to do sales on an app, or like, where do you begin to understand where digital transformation should play its role in a company?
We always look at things through the prism of value versus effort, right? And so like what we want to find are those items that are highest value, lowest effort, or at the very least, avoid the items that are low value, high effort. And so, I would zoom out as far as I could and look at all the operating areas of my business and bring in people who kind of head up those departments and run a bit of a brainstorming exercise around like, like what are the friction points in your organization? What are the manual processes you see? What are potential, you have a nugget in your brain of where technology could really change things. Let's map those out. That's usually where we start and just get a ton of sticky notes. And then we actually use something called the 2x2 matrix, which is literally like a cost versus effort, high-low quadrant grid. And then we plot those sticky notes as a group with our clients and see which ones fall in the kind of low effort, high value section. And then that's how we kind of look at it at first. And then we, have some of those things in mind. And then, we're talking about the entire end state along the way, what the true vision looks like. So that's sort of it. Like it goes back to our previous point earlier where we were talking about it doesn't need to be your whole business. It can just be, you can start with a single process. You could start with a single department or, a service offering within that department. But ideally, that you're not just working on that in a vacuum, because you're not really transforming the business, right? You're just kind of improving operations. Instead, it kind of adds up to a more holistic vision for the whole company, and that's just step one.
These ideas can be internal, like the paperwork example from the old agency, or they could be customer facing, like the McDonald's app.
Yeah, you have it right. You have it totally right. Like considering this is a home building podcast, the whole like interactive select the finishes in your home or in your room, in your kitchen. Like that's part of looking at the traditional way of how people normally buy houses and make their selections in person in the showroom with the materials and all that stuff, and how we might be able to translate that to digital. You might think of that and go, oh man, like to build that software is going to cost just hundreds of thousands of dollars. But there's various ways to do it. And we always talk internally about the whole idea of like a minimum viable product, and the idea that you want to build a bike, then a skateboard, then a car. You don't want to build a car first. Skateboard, bike, car. So like, what is the skateboard version of this, this digital selections experience look like? Because there are ways to roll out a test that, it might not look like as polished as like Tesla's, build your own Tesla kind of interface, but you can run it as an experiment. And if people are willing to use it, then you have, the business case to put your money behind it. I think that's like a potential example of how the kind of MVP methodology and those baby steps can come together into something tangible.
Yeah, and that's such a good way to look at it. Like you can build your business case incrementally through these MVP products, right?
Yeah, you can. And instead of saying like, again, it's the what if questions I think that are a really handy tool to have. Because like, yeah, we all know if you find the right people and have $250,000, you can build an incredible online experience, for rendering the interior of your house after you sign on. Or maybe as a lead generator. That's cool. But like, what if you only had 50 grand? Could you do it for 50 grand? What if you only had 20 grand? What does the $20,000 version look like? And you can have those conversations. And can you make a $20,000 bet or a $50,000 bet? Which, if it succeeds, great, you can charge ahead. If it doesn't, at least you're not out $250,000. Those sorts of things.
In this same line of thinking, and sort of looking forward to the future and crystal balling a little bit, what do you see as the future technologies, the change, the things that are going to come into digital transformation to like take it to its next step?
I think you're going to see more and more automation. And you're going to see more and more automation that is in the hands of non-technical folks. So I think just like we saw the rise of, like kind of the DIY website building platforms, I think you'll start to see some of that stuff move over into DIY kind of business logic, quote unquote, programming software. So instead of, having to pay a shop like us a couple $100,000 to run an experiment on some software, you might be able to MVP it yourself. If you have a technically adept person in-house, and kind of do that MVP, that first business case proving ground, before you need to build the version that will support the whole business. So I think we'll see a lot more of that, the kind of increased democratization of software that isn't quite like, full scale production ready, but is awesome for testing use cases. And then, on the really, really innovative side, I think we'll see more and more adoption of VR and AR when it comes to trying to replicate in-person experiences digitally. Over time, that technology just becomes more and more accessible to development teams, and therefore more and more accessible price-wise to the companies that might want it.
I feel like AR and VR are going to be the next QR code. Like QR codes died. And then they came back, and now everyone's like, we got to have a QR code. And AR, VR, like that was a hot thing. And for a while, and there were a lot of builders that went out and were like, yeah, we're going to do the whole virtual tour reality change. And, that kind of died. But I think with the way technology has changed and the way that things are moving, that is far more realistic today than probably it's ever been.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is people's comfort with the technology. Like the pandemic forced all of us to get used to doing a whole lot of things online that we never really did before. And so now I think that kind of opened people's minds a little bit to just be more willing to do some of the things online when it comes to that in terms of VR, AR, that they normally just would have never thought about. So I think that's usually, if technology is kind of ebbing and flowing, kind of like the QR code did, when it comes back up to prominence, it's usually a combination of factors, customers, willingness to experiment with it, the price to implement it, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, we're having conversations with a couple of pretty much video game companies who've now started, real estate rendering branches. And they're using their video game engines and their video game software and the technicians to build out these 3D virtual environments that play like a video game and can be experienced like a video game and can change environments like a video game, which I think is just so interesting.
It totally is. And it's funny because you just had the word play in there, and what came into my brain is like the emotional side of buying. And which we all like to think that we're these hyper logical, beings that are just like, no, I will look at the math and make the right logical business decision or a home buying decision or whatever. But in reality, none of us are like that, right? There's a big emotional component of it, which is, I would imagine, I'm not, a home building expert by any means, but like I would imagine is a reason why the showroom has kind of stayed as this like force when it comes to selling homes, because like you can get in the physical space and you can get excited about it. And you can see yourself in there and you can feel the tactile things that you're going to feel when you're actually in your home. But if we can take that sense of kind of wonder and excitement and use cutting edge technologies to kind of bridge that gap, now it becomes less of like this, okay, I'm walking through like a digital tour and I guess this is what it was like, but I'm sitting in my house that's cold and drafty, so it's hard to really understand. If we can infuse that sense of play and wonder, then I think along with that will come a little bit more excitement and willingness to use those sorts of tools, and might see some more outcomes from them.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting insight, Jeff, in that you nailed it on the head. Like, absolutely emotion plays into this. Like, for sure, you would think, biggest purchase of anyone's life. Like, I'm sure there's a ton of logic that goes into buying this and making sure it's right and everything else. But at the end of the day, there's tons of emotion involved. And I think that the digital transformation and the technologies and where things are at today with video game engine for rendering, just as an example, helps bring a lot more emotion into the technology, which makes it far more acceptable and relatable and comfortable in experiencing things that way and helping make your decision that way. I want to also ask about AI and the role that AI is and can play in digital transformation. And is that like at the cutting edge of things, or are we going to start to see just like a lot more AI coming into our lives all over the place?
I think we will see more of it. And it's like any other technology, it'll become cheaper and more accessible. And that's when you'll start to see it tick up a little bit. So you just need to find the right people and talk to them to see if like AI is the answer for you or not when it comes to digital transformation. Other times, it might not be AI. It might just be like a well-written if-then statement, right? So the end user gets the experience of interfacing directly with technology. You get the benefits of it because you don't have someone there answering a million questions or whatever else. But it just doesn't require the cost to implement, because the true solution to the problem is an actual AI. It's just a pretty heavy logic chain.
One question I want to ask you, Jeff, is just really taking it back to that, translating it for the layman. I loved your point about the democratization that will come eventually in the digital transformation space, but we're just not there yet. And right now it's this kind of Wild West where you get these people who, maybe they've taken one development course and now they call themselves a developer, or you get these like massive app building shops. And so if someone is looking at digital transformation, what questions should they be asking a partner? How should they be evaluating the partners that they want to do this with? I just think about myself. I always have to take a buddy with me when I'm looking at cars because I don't know anything. I'm not interested in it. Like I know I need a car, but I don't understand them. So I always feel this fear. So if someone's feeling fear, but knows they need DX or digital transformation, what kind of questions should they be asking potential partners or things they should look for?
Well, what they should ultimately look for is whether or not the person they're talking to is really interested in understanding their needs and solving their actual problem versus selling them a solution, right? So like one of the things we strive for really hard here, and it's in one of our like differentiators that we have on our little strategy sheet, and that's the right solution. So no matter what, when we're talking to folks, we're looking to understand their needs, and we're looking to point them in the direction of the right solution. And sometimes that's not us. Sometimes that's nothing digital. Like that's the big thing. If someone's like, yeah, here's your solution, you need to do X, Y, Z, and they're getting to the answer way too fast that conveniently includes them getting paid 100 grand or something like that, then, they're looking to make the sale first rather than looking to help you as a person first. So that's kind of what I look for all the time. And like, I said, Santana, before we started recording, that like I actually recently went through, the home purchasing and home building experience. And that was one of the big things is the guy was like very upfront, that I dealt with out in British Columbia. And he was just like, yeah, you could use this one or this one, but knowing what you're looking for, I'd actually pick this one because it's better value in the house. And he sold me something that was less money than like the thing I was actually looking at. And so I'm like, okay, inherently this person is first and foremost looking to see what I want and what will kind of satisfy my needs. And then he's looking to see what the solution is. That's the biggest thing, like it isn't necessarily hardcore questions about technology frameworks or what your service level agreement looks like or any of that stuff. That matters, and you can get there a little later. But first and foremost is who's the person looking out for, themselves first or you. Digital transformation is still a very fuzzy concept, and but I think the key kind of takeaway is it really is what it sounds like. It's looking at your organization from the 50,000 foot view and wondering what it might look like years down the road if you really leaned into technology. One of the questions we love to ask is like, what would you be worried about if a competitor entered the market with it? So like, if you're a big bank and you ask yourself that question, or like a big investment firm, and you were all just doing, like mutual fund style, personal touch investments, and someone said, like, would you be worried if someone came in and, basically used a robo-advisor to and cut your fees down by, 100th? Would you be nervous by that? And if the answer is yes, then, you probably want to get there first, right? So that's sometimes people get stuck on the vision setting exercise of what their kind of like future state might look like. And sometimes that's an interesting question to ask is what would you be nervous to see a competitor enter the market with? If you can answer that, then maybe that's what you should be working towards and try to beat them to the punch.
That's an interesting way to look at it, and probably what taxi companies should have done.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's hard to see everything, but if someone thought it up, other people did too. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the conversation, Jeff. This has been very interesting and very enlightening as well.
Jordan, I feel like I say this every episode, but there's so much to unpack here. I'm going to try to keep my takeaway short and sweet as much as I can. We got to have Jeff on at another point for another episode. I feel like there's just a whole can of worms behind digital transformation.
Oh, 100%.
Right. But the thing I wanted to have as my takeaway, because it's such a buzzy, jargony word right now, and not just in the digital space, but in the marketing space in general, is friction. Removing friction. We're all supposed to be out here removing friction. What does that mean? And I think that's my takeaway from today, which is friction is inefficiency. Friction is wasted dollars, wasted hours, wasted customer experience, wasted productivity. It's pain points, and it's anything that can be reduced through the use of technology in order to improve how a service is delivered or how the results of that service are realized, just a whole number of things. And so I think, friction, it's easy to say, let's reduce friction, but what does that really mean? Because it's not just installing big, expensive softwares for your customers. It's also making your experience better for all different departments. And so that's my takeaway is what is friction and how can it be solved digitally? And it can be started in small ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I love the idea that it doesn't have to be large, giant, let's spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a new website or a CRM or something like that. Like you can start small, go incremental. I think building off of that, my takeaway is I really enjoyed the conversation we had about digital transformation, not just entirely consumer facing, but how digital transformation can play a role within the organization. So when we take a look at what are the processes that are happening within the organization that digital transformation can play a role in, that can lead to reduced friction, can lead to a better experience, can lead to, reduced overhead, can lead to reduced errors, that can lead to better customer experience, that all of these things can then ultimately lead to better profit margins, more profits, more sales, better customer experiences. I think that's really interesting. The opportunity for digital transformation, not just to be consumer facing or wholly consumer facing, but for that to be a part of how you deal with internal processes and your internal operations as well.
I couldn't agree more. Case in point, Zoom and meetings and travel for offices before and after the pandemic. Before the pandemic, the amount of money that companies were sending everyone everywhere, from training to sales conferences to you name it. And I'm not a proponent of everything going digital. I'm very much hybrid. Certain things are better face to face. I absolutely believe that. However, there was an obscene amount of travel that happened in business, and how much money are companies saving now? And also friction, here it is again, for the actual customers who might not want to do as much work travel as they were doing. So absolutely, Jordan.
This has been Build Up, a ZGM podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe on your favorite listening app. Thanks to Shelby, our editor, Santana, our executive producer, Scott for our original music, and you for listening along. Be sure to follow us on your favorite social platform at Build Up Podcast.